Welcome to Chapter 14, Access Control, Laws, Policies, and Standards. While many organizations adopt access controls to achieve business objectives, these mechanisms are also adopted for many other reasons. This chapter examines the laws and regulations governing information security and the ways that complying with these regulations drives the use of access control. This chapter also discusses how organizations use policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines to achieve control objectives. Security breaches can have a serious implication ranging from loss of profit to fines and prison time. The goal of this chapter is to highlight the important role of access control in the larger scheme of business, governmental regulations, and operations of critical infrastructure. Topics covered: U.S. compliance laws and regulations concerning IT, access control, security policies, best practices, where access control fits into the overall IT structure, examples of access control, standards, procedures, and guidelines. U.S. compliance laws and regulations. Today, corporations are required to be compliant with various government standards, depending on the industry that they are. The healthcare industry has HIPAA. The publicly traded companies have SOX or Sarbanes-Oxley. They require that we follow these laws that protect both the consumer, the business, the employees of the organization. Another benefit is that secure business practice can enhance customers' confidence by ensuring customers that private information is stored securely. Creating and adhering to the required laws can be difficult initially. It usually comes at a cost and time consuming to build, making sure we understand the laws. But once the systems are in place, it is relatively easy to follow. In IT, it's imperative that you keep up to date with your regulations compliance. Understanding what regulations affect your business are vital to success. Different industries deal with different types of areas. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, otherwise known as the Financial Modernization of 1999, primarily aimed at the financial services industry. This not only covers banking, but also insurance, securities, brokers, lenders, real estate, settlement, tax. The Act takes compliance and other security outside of the IT only world in the realm of the entire company, requiring every department to be responsible for securing the consumer privacy. Information technology is a major component, but overall the implementation is not the soul of IT. Some of the basic requirements: develop, implement, and maintain a comprehensive written information security that contains administrative, technical, and safeguards that are appropriate to the size and complexity. Companies are required to continuous risk management, that you must identify potential risks, contains provisions to protect non-public personal information and financial institutions. Companies' privacy note must be on their webpage, and they're obligated to select and retain services that are capable of maintaining appropriate safeguard. One of the major components is that the security program in place that limits access and protects consumer financial data. In terms of access control, the organization should define who can access data and for how long. Any access to sensitive data must be logged. Data security goes beyond storage and encompasses all aspects of the organization. The HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accounting Act. This was started in 1996 and has two main parts. Part 1 protects the health insurance coverage for workers and their families if they change or lose job. Title 2, as an administrative simplification, requires the establishment of national standards for electronic healthcare transactions and national identifiers for providers, health insurance plans, and employees. It also addresses security and privacy. So we're going to look at these different rules. The privacy rules, transaction and code set of rules, unique identifier, security rules, and enforcement. The privacy rule took effect in 2003. It regulates the use of disclosure of protecting information held coverage in titles. It establishes regulations for the use of disclosures protecting healthcare information, which any information that is concerned health status, health care, or any payment for health care that linked to the individual. So what does that mean? The individual within 30 days of request, when its covered entity has obtained the written permission of the individual when the law is implemented. Transactions and code set rule. The transaction code set requires a common standard for the transfer of health information between healthcare providers and organizations that payment for these services. Unique identifier standard rules. A unique identifier is created for providers' health plans. The employer identifier, which is based on the IRS employee's identification number, patient identifier, which is a standard unique way of identifying patients, the national provider identifier, which was originally developed for the Medicare system, and the health plan provider, which is a 9-digit developed. Security rule. The security rule is a compliant to the privacy rule, complement to the privacy rule. Security rule deals with electronic protected health information. It lays out 3 layers of security safeguards that must be used. Adopt a written set of policies and procedures. Reference policies and procedures to make sure they're good. Identify employees and groups. Restrict access, and so on. We also have the physical safeguards. Put controls in place that govern the additional removal of software and hardware to the environment. Carefully control and monitor access to equipment containing that. Limit access to the equipment and software information. Enforcement rule. The HIPAA enforcement was created in February 2006 by the Department of Health and Human Resources. It is the final rule that details the bias and procedures for imposing civil, monetary penalties in governor entities. The rules resolves compliance issues in an informal manner before restoring to monetary penalties. The Sarbanes-Oxley, or known as SOX, of 2002 was created to protect investors by improving the accuracy and reliability of financial disclosures of publicly traded companies. SOX accomplishes this through strengthening existing penalties, making corporate officers personally responsible for the disclosures, and imposes harsher punishment, larger fines, and prison sentences for any individual who knowingly alters or destroys the information that is intended or to obstruct investigations. So there's 11 titles that make up the SOX Act. The Publicly Accounting Oversight Board provides independent oversight of publicly accounting. Auditors' independence established standards that require external auditors to be completely independent of the firm. Corporate responsibility mandates that executives must take individually personal responsibility for the accuracy of compliance. Enhanced financial disclosures describes enhanced reporting procedures required to financial. Commission resources defines that the condition under which the Security and Exchange Commission can pay commissions. Studies and reports define the study, and Controller General. Corporate and criminal fraud accountability imposes documentation retention if required. White crime penalty enforcement increases the criminal penalty associated with white crime collar. Corporate tax states that the chief executive officer should sign the company tax return, and corporate fraud accountability identifies fraud. Family Education Right and Privacy Act, FERPA, of 1974. It's the federal law that protects the privacy and ensures the accuracy of student educational records. Educational institutions are required to protect educational records by adhering to strict guidelines set in the Act. The faculty and staff must be familiar with FERPA before they may release any student's educational record. FERPA establishes students' right to know the information, location, and purpose for educational records. Educational records may appear in the following forms: written documents stored in the student's file, computer media, microfiche, microfilm, videos, videotapes, audio tapes, CDs, films, photographs, any record that pertains to personal identification. The following are exempt: private notes, law enforcement records, medical records, statistical data does not contain information, and pre-graded materials before the final grade is determined. Communication Assistance Law Enforcement of 1994 requires that telecommunications carriers and the maker of the equipment used by the telecommunicator take steps to facilitate the electronic surveillance activities of law enforcement agencies. Must cooperate with legitimate law enforcement's request to conduct electronic surveillance on an individual and provide detailed calling records of the individual under investigation. The Children's Internet Privacy Act of 2000, that addresses internet access in public schools and libraries. Any school or library use the federal E-rating program. E-rating offers discounts to libraries and schools, ensuring that they have affordable and to modern telecommunications. Access by minors is inappropriate. The safety and security of minors when using electronic communications, unauthorized access, unauthorized disclosures are some of the things that we have. And we have the FDA. Regulation deals with Food and Drug Administration, guidelines of electronic records and signatures, and that's pretty straightforward. The North America Electric Reliability Council handles regulations of energy and utility companies, created in 1968. Physical guidelines provide physical protection measures for all. Americans in the Disability Act includes provisions to ensuring that everyone has equal rights to accommodations. So some best practices for private sector enterprise organization. Access control policies are generally different for enterprise level organizations than they are with smaller organizations. An enterprise organization may have employees across the wide geographic location, even multiple countries. These organizations have complex organization structures with several fairly autonomous divisions. Security policies for enterprise organization must take this complexity into the act. Defining an authorization policy. An authorization policy is a high-level document that defines how the organization will assign and enforce access control rights. It is important to write formal authorizations. IT security policy framework. Organizations have policies and procedures in place. Business units such as accounting and human resources, they also establish policies that must be followed. Policy that document that describes specific requirements of rules that must be met, standards is a collection of requirements that must be met by anyone who performs a given task or works in a specific system. Guidelines is a set of suggestions or best practices meeting standards and policies. Procedures is a set of specific steps to be taken to achieve desired results. Which policies are needed in access control? Acceptable use policy describes what tasks can and cannot be performed using the organization's computer equipment. Password policy describes the organization's requirement for a strong password creation. Account management policy describes new accounts to be created. And remote access defines the connecting methods that are going to be used. What standards are needed to support these? User account describes various types of users' accounts, describes IDs. And what do we need to implement these? User fills out access forms, IT receives the forms are reviewed, and then they're carried out. We should also have use for when an employee leaves, what are you going to be doing? So the summary, we looked at the several scenarios in which control mandated by law, and we looked at all the different laws, which is controlling access to the information. You learned about the best practices, standards, policies, and procedures for implementing access control. Finally, you explored several cases. So these are some of the things that we looked at. No matter what industry you're working, if there are government laws, we have to follow them. And we must follow them to the letter, or there are consequences that we need to do. So whatever company you're working for, make sure that you are following all the laws, procedures that we have in place. Thank you.